In the early 20th century, there seemed to be an escalation in the speed of change, the rate of change, and how quickly things sprang up from previous things. Along with the social, political, and economic turbulence of that period, visual art and design experienced a series of creative revolutions, bringing the role of art and design together in society. And there were long-held values and approaches to organized space that were brought into question. A lot of the art movements influenced the graphic language of form and visual communication for the rest of the 20th century and into our current day. Works by Spanish painter Pablo Picasso were the genesis of Cubism. Picasso was influenced by ancient Iberian and African tribal art and the work of French post-impressionist Paul Cézanne, who treated nature in terms of the cylinder and the cone. Two forms of Cubism emerged: analytical, represented by Picasso and George Braque, and synthetic, represented by Juan Gris. In analytical Cubism, the planes of the subject matter were analyzed from different vantage points and assembled into a rhythmic composition of geometric planes. In synthetic Cubism, the artist drew invented forms based on past observations. These were symbols rather than representations of subject matter. Fernand Léger depicted subjects with cylinders, spheres, and cones. He used flat planes of color, urban motifs, and hard-edge precision, and he helped define the modern design sensibility that came about after World War I. Futurist painters sought to introduce dynamic motion, speed, and energy into the static two-dimensional surface. Fortunato de Pero applied futurist philosophy to graphic and advertising design. Reacting against the carnage of World War I, the Dada movement claimed to be anti-art, and it had a strong negative and destructive element. Dada writers and artists were concerned with shock, protest, and nonsense. They incorporated chance placement and absurd title in their graphic work. Kurt Schwitters was the creator of the offshoot of Dada called Merz. His complex designs combine Dada's elements of nonsense and surprise with strong design properties. And you can see in this composition the roots of postmodern design, layering, and the grunge movement. In the early 20s, Surrealism sprung up in Paris and was based on searching for the reality behind the reality, dealing with intuition, dreams, the unconscious realm, and was influenced by Freud. The poet André Breton was the founder of Surrealism, and he dealt a lot with dreams, magic, the spirit of rebellion, and the mysteries of the subconscious. Surrealism is intended to express either verbally or in writing the true function of thought. Joan Moreau was part of a group of surrealist painters known as the Emblematics, and he explored a process of metamorphosis through which he developed motifs into cryptic and organic shapes. Kathy Kollwitz was a German expressionist artist who documented the plight of women and children and the working poor in very bold figurative drawings, prints, and sculpture. A photographic technique called solarization was invented by Man Ray, and this photographic process involves a reversal of tonal sequence in the denser areas of a photographic negative or print, and that adds strong black contours to the edges. Solarization is achieved by giving a developing photographic image another exposure to light. The modern art movements and the communication needs of the World War affected the approach to poster design. The shift from naturalism to a simplified visual language of sign and shape had begun with Toulouse-Lautrec and was continued by James Pride and William Nicholson, who were known as the Beggarstaffs. The Beggarstaffs introduced a technique that we later call collage, in which flat shapes of color were cut out and sensitive edges were drawn with scissors, and then everything was assembled into a composition. Incomplete shapes created implied lines that engaged the viewer. The Plakenstil, or poster style, was a reductive flat color design style that emerged in Germany early in the 20th century, and it employed flat background color, large simple images, and product names. So it was very much advertising oriented. During World War I, which was 1914 to 1918, before radio and other electronic means of communication were widespread, posters served as major communication tools for propaganda and visual persuasion. Poster design produced by the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, were radically different from those produced by the Allied forces, France, Russia, Great Britain, and later the United States. In Austria-Hungary and Germany, war posters continued the traditions of the Vienna Secession and Plakenstil. Words and images were integrated, and the essence of the message was conveyed by simple images defined by powerful shapes and patterns. The most effective of the British posters was the 1915 recruitment poster by Alfred Leete that showed Lord Horatio Kitchener, the British Secretary of War, pointing directly at the viewer and saying, "Your country needs you." This poster was widely imitated, and across the pond in the U.S., James Montgomery Flagg created an American version in 1917. The Uncle Sam, I Want You for the U.S. Army poster was one of the most reproduced posters in history. Illustration was a very powerful force in graphic design during this time. Joseph C. Leyendecker was one of the most popular American illustrators between World War I and the early 40s. He created a canon of idealized physical beauty and combined common visual symbols such as the flag, the Statue of Liberty, and heroic imagery to promote patriotism. American posters honored soldiers and created a cult around national leaders or symbolic figures, and emphasized the public's contributions to the war effort. A leading German designer, Ludwig Hohlwein, picked up on Plakenstil and straddled the line between symbolic posters of the Central Powers graphic designers and the more literal pictorial posters of the Allies. His initial inspiration was the beggar staffs, but unlike them, he applied texture and decorative pattern to the shapes of his images and also incorporated bold sans serif type, which became part of the image. Later on, he introduced gradation and tone into his shapes to make them more naturalistic. The evolution of his work coincided with Hitler's rise to power in Germany, and his reputation was sullied by his collaboration with the Nazis. After World War I, Cubist ideas inspired a new direction in pictorial images, which is often referred to as Art Deco. This is a term used to identify popular geometric works of the 20s and 30s. Influences included Cubism, the Bauhaus, the Vienna Secession, and Stil and Suprematism, as well as Egyptian, Aztec, and Assyrian motifs. It's known for streamlining, zigzags, decorative geometry, and attempted to express the modern era of the machine while still satisfying a passion for decoration that carried over from Art Nouveau. In Russia and Holland, Cubism was pushed into a pure geometric art and a formal approach to typography that subsequently emerged. Following the Russian Revolution about 1920, a deep ideological split occurred between Russian artists such as Malevich and Kandinsky, who felt that art should remain a spiritual activity, and other artists like Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko, who were constructivists and devoted themselves to serving the new communist society through industrial design, visual communication, and applied arts. Kazimir Malevich founded a new painting style called Suprematism, which rejected pictorial content altogether in favor of pure geometric form and pure color. The constructivist ideal was best exemplified by L. Lissitzky. Lissitzky's work was an important step toward the creation of a visual program for organizing information based on a grid. His treatment of sans serif typography and bold rules were an early expression of the modernist aesthetic. And Alexander Rodchenko abandoned painting as a means of personal expression and turned to graphic design. He felt a responsibility to society and to communicate. Rodchenko produced page designs that had strong geometric construction. He used large areas of pure color. He used bold, hand-lettered sans-serif letter forms. He experimented with overprinting, typography, and photomontage as he sought to innovate an illustration technique appropriate for the 20th century. And some of the techniques he explored coincided with developments in cinema, such as simultaneous action, superimposed images, extreme close-ups, and rhythmic repetition. The De Stijl movement was launched in the Netherlands in 1917 by Theo van Doesburg. And the philosophy was that visual forms develop from pure geometric abstraction. The visual vocabulary of De Stijl artists was reduced to red, yellow, blue, black, gray, white, straight horizontal and vertical lines, and flat rectangular or square planes. This movement sought universal laws of equilibrium and harmony, which could be a prototype for a new social order. Elementarism was Theo van Doesburg's theory that declared the diagonal to be more dynamic compositional principle than straight horizontal and vertical construction, as we see here and here. And in this piece by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, De Stijl principles were applied to typography, and this overall design shows a collaboration between constructivism, De Stijl, and Merz.